could play the background. I could play the background.
I figured this is probably the best place to record the podcast for the gospel that we're talking about this week. We're talking about Jesus going back home and preaching the gospel and revealing who he is to the people in his own home. And right now I'm in the airport in Washington, D.C. You can look around and see the people here. I'm in an airport in D.C. and I just finished speaking to Gonzaga High School on their freshman retreat. And for those of you who don't know, I was born and raised in Washington, D.C. And it's always difficult to come back home and preach the gospel to people who actually knew you, who actually know who you really are. And that's kind of like the test that this gospel is giving us. You know, it's easy to be fake. It's easy to act holy amongst people that have no idea who you really are. It's a lot more difficult to be holy, to be a follower of God amongst people who actually know your story. And in this gospel, that's exactly what Jesus is doing. He's been preaching at other places and people know his name and he's gaining renown and people know that he's an amazing preacher. And then he goes back home to the people that actually know him. He goes back home. The Bible says he opens up the gospel and he starts preaching the word from Isaiah. And he puts the book down and lets people know that that revelation has happened in their midst. That he is actually the Messiah. It makes you think about a lot of things. The first thing is this: are you really willing to be the person that God created you to be, even when it's uncomfortable? The second thing is this: are you really willing to be who God created you to be? Are you really willing to share the gospel and what God has done in your life in an authentic way, not a fake way, but an authentic way, not a way that pleases other people, but actually showing your belief? And I guess the third thing and the most challenging thing is this: if Jesus was to come in your midst, would you recognize him? Are you so caught up in what you think is right and what you've learned without cultivating a relationship with God, without learning God's love and God's mercy and God's truth, to the point that if Jesus was to come in front of you right now and reveal himself with who he actually is, that you wouldn't recognize him? So that's the challenge. That's the challenge the gospel gives us. To one, be bold about our faith. To two, to be real, to be actually who God created us to be our authentic self. And to three, be humble enough, be vulnerable enough, to be loving enough, be merciful enough to recognize God when he comes in our lives.